Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. We have a game in the books here in 2024. It took almost 6 hours to get it in the books, but Penn State is 1-0, a 34-12 victory down in West Virginia. We've got Daniel Gallen joining us live from Morgantown. He's still tucked away in the stadium. That I don't know if you thought you needed a sleeping bag today by the end of it because you were there for so long, but you've been posted up in this stadium since early morning Saturday. It's now early evening Saturday. And so we've got a lot to talk about, Daniel. I'm here in our Happy Valley headquarters. You, Mark, Grace Brennan have been all over the coverage for Lions247.com since the start of Saturday. We have a ton coming your way to the site. We already have James Franklin's full press conference, a breakdown of what he said during that press conference. Daniel's got a lot about how the weather impacted this game, how they bounced back. We got stuff about Drew Allar's performance and just a lot of instant analysis on the site. But here on the podcast, we're happy to have you with us. Sometimes folks have called these therapy sessions, but I think that phrasing is more applicable to a loss or one of those really tough head-scratching victories. This one was about what you'd want to hope for as a Penn State fan coming out of the summer in terms of what we saw early in that marriage between Andy Kotelnicki and Drew Allar, what you got from the defense early on here under Tom Allen, and ultimately the way they were able to get through an adverse situation early on the field, halfway from Mother Nature down in Morgantown.
Yeah, it's almost 8 p.m. here on Saturday night. I think we pulled into the parking lot here at Milan Puskar Stadium a little bit before 9 a.m. So we're coming up on the 11-hour mark, and you can see the stands behind me. I mean, they looked like this for a decent portion of this afternoon during that weather delay. But, yeah, it was kind of a crazy, weird start to the season. But Penn State came out on the other side, and if you're a team that has national championship aspirations, college football aspirations, you're probably going to have to win some weird ones. And I think that for the most part, this one qualifies as a weird one. And end result, Penn State 34, West Virginia 12, going back to Happy Valley 1-0 and giving us plenty to talk about and plenty to break down.
Am I crazy for thinking that for somehow the kind of the national narrative about this game in the last month or so made this win look even more impressive for Penn State than it otherwise would have? I mean, we were talking about a situation in our pregame podcast where the betting line goes from 12 points down to, I think, ended up 7.5, 8 points before kickoff. You've got Nick Saban and Urban Meyer, the two most successful coaches of this modern era of college football, each of them on their respective national television platforms, within a few minutes of kickoff in Morgantown, they picked West Virginia to upset Penn State. This is a team that beat West Virginia by 23 points last year, and I must have missed where West Virginia added a bunch of talent and Penn State bled a bunch of talent and didn't overcome it. But ultimately what we got was a 22-point victory. And really an opponent here, we'll get into some of the details here, but never felt threatened by West Virginia as the game progressed. And a big part of that was how the first half ended and how the second half started. But a little bit surprised that Penn State ultimately didn't need to sweat this one out deeper into the contest.
Yeah, I think that pregame talk, I feel like it was more about West Virginia than it was about Penn State. I know that if you're Penn State or a Penn State fan, it's easy to feel disrespected by that a little bit. But I think that people looked at how West Virginia finished last year. They looked at what they had coming back. They looked at how they were playing with Garrett Green down the stretch. And you look at where they are early in the polls. They're in that receiving votes category. I think they might have been the first team out, like 26 unofficially, in either the coaches or the AP poll. And you look at their conference, you look at their schedule, and you're like, yeah, this is a team that can do some things. So, and we know what Penn State is. I think at this point, the program under James Franklin is a known quantity. I think that the floor for Penn State going into every season is 10-2, 9-3. And I think a lot of people looked at that and they said, okay, West Virginia is a team on the rise. They can pick one off here. I was surprised by as many predictions that went towards West Virginia as there were. But overall, me personally, I didn't think that said as much about Penn State, because then when you read the Penn State independent coverage, it was Andy Kotelnicki. This is going to be great. This is going to unlock the offense. It was kind of weird. Like in the Penn State vacuum, everything was positive. But as soon as you exited the vacuum and put it in the context of this game and maybe what people wanted to see from this West Virginia team, that's when you got, okay, Penn State might not be able to do this. But, I picked Penn State 35-21. I thought it would be a little close early, and then I thought that Penn State, the talent, that would kind of help them pull away, and that's kind of what happened. But it was some guys that maybe were unproven a little bit, in our eyes at least, that really helped Penn State do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure James Franklin didn't mind the way the narrative went as this game neared. He probably appreciates that, because truly, right now, when you think about the experts, out there in this industry that are viewed as experts, picking against Penn State here, or maybe thinking that Penn State would struggle, maybe how they recalibrate. And now what's ahead of Penn State, you look at the schedule, they've got 4 home games ahead of them in a row. They got a bye week in the mix there, an early bye week. They're not on the road again until Southern Cal in mid-October. And because you clear this hurdle, and because you really leaped over the hurdle, not just kind of tripped over it or skimmed over the top of the hurdle, I do wonder what it can do for them in terms of a launch pad, maybe a greater launch pad opportunity coming out of this one than we forecasted a win might be a month ago. I mean, 1-0 is still not more than 1-0 at the end of the day, but carrying a little cachet nationally, whether it's for the votes that the rankings receive, or whether it's for recruit in different corners of America, can't hurt.
Definitely. I think that this is a win that puts Penn State on the right side of the ledger early on. Some of it depends on West Virginia, how they go about the season, but if they're the team that people thought that they would be, when you get to the end of the year and you're comparing resumes, you're looking at, wow, Penn State went into Morgantown in week 1 and won by 22 points. They really had it together. They have this signature win, you could say, on their resume right now. And I think that that's something that you can't really discount. We're still a long way from the college football playoff and everything like that. But for right now, this is a really good feather in Penn State's cap.
I thought it was interesting after this game, and a couple answers to questions. James Franklin really addressed the risk reward to taking on a game like this. Game 1 against West Virginia in this kind of adverse environment. I mean, I saw videos of the stuff the fans were yelling at the players. It certainly wasn't a welcoming environment for Penn State down in West Virginia. And on top of that, you're playing against Power 5 opponents. You're playing against legitimate, big-time college football recruits. Maybe they weren't recruited by Alabama or Penn State or Georgia, but these are legitimate players, many of them going to play the NFL from West Virginia. And that's a big difference versus, the opponent Penn State will see next week, Bowling Green. If you're swapping these games and you're opening against Bowling Green, you can work with some training wheels at first. And we saw Penn State was kind of riding with the training wheels. That snap situation where Drew Allar wasn't expecting it. I think apparently West Virginia was matching the cadence with some clapping in the trenches. That was some confusion. And so to James Franklin's point, he didn't really tip his hand, but I think we know what he thinks about this. He said, you really have to wonder. It's great when you win these, he says. It's a great feeling, but you have to also think about what's the right move for the program when you're scheduling non-conference, because they know what they had to have ahead of them in the Big Ten. They know that if you win enough games in the Big Ten, you're going to the college football playoff. And at the end of the day, I think, like you told us after that Auburn home and home series, now this one's complete. I don't know that James Franklin wants to revisit these kind of series, for as much as a lot of fans love them, for as much as it kind of drives the conversation for us in August and the TV ratings that it does week 1. I don't think James Franklin would sneeze away an easy, he wouldn't call it easy to us, but one that would be perceived as a kind of an easy stepping stone, to enter the season. And that's just kind of what I was picking up. It feels good today, but I think James Franklin wouldn't mind avoiding circumstances like this down the road.
Oh, yeah. I remember being down in Auburn, and he got the question that was something along the lines of like, this is really fun 2 years. Like, when are you going to do this again? And he was, whoa, like, I don't really want to do this again. And I think you look at the future schedules that Penn State has, some of the teams that are on them, like Syracuse, I think Temple might be on one. That's just kind of what it is. That's the nature of the beast right now in college football. I think everyone would like to see more really fun non-conference games. I would like to. I think it's been fun these 4 years on the beat where the non-conference slate, I've had 2 Auburn games and 2 West Virginia games. I think that's pretty unique, but it's kind of the way things are going, because we talked about this being a feather in Penn State's cap. If you go the other way, you're 2-1 going into the Big Ten play. Your margin for error just shrinks so much. So I see where James Franklin is coming from. I see where the fans are coming from. I think it's one of those things that when you get down to it in college football, there's like a lot of things, there's just not really a clear answer, not really the situation that can make everybody happy, and that's just kind of the nature of it. But it's fun to be back here today.
We have a lot to learn about this Penn State football team. We get to start to do that a little bit here on Saturday, Daniel, and obviously something we were all looking forward to was the explosive plays. We're going to get into that in a moment, but I feel like we led off the post-game podcast with big picture stuff. We're going to talk about the details in a moment, but we got to bridge the gap by addressing the fact that this was not a normal game. It went into halftime with Penn State ahead 20-6. And then you didn't get out of halftime for 2 hours and 19 minutes. And by the end of this whole situation, by the time it's 34-12 and we got triple zeros in the clock, it was like 5 hours and 45 minutes overall. So Daniel, tell us what it was like experiencing that in Morgantown, how you saw Penn State deal with that scramble, and what you heard from James Franklin afterward about some of the lessons that they learned and applied from that 2017 trip to East Lansing. I know a lot of our listeners, this is going to sound like, chalk against the board screeching, but they were coming off a loss to Ohio State. It was their only loss. They had an opportunity to jump back into the college football playoff mix and maybe go 11-1. They're leading on the road in East Lansing. The weather's nasty. There's lightning, long delay, terrible conditions. Penn State, by their own admission, maybe wasn't prepared enough as they would have preferred for that matchup. The game gets away from them. It's a last-second loss, and it ultimately kind of casts a bit of a shadow over that entire 2017 season, which had a lot of potential. So with that out of the way, that terrible trip down memory lane, how did they apply lessons learned to this experience?
Yeah, I think one thing, too, that you have to factor in with this delay is that it came about at the end of halftime. So you have the 2 hour, 19-minute delay, and then you add like 20 minutes to it, or I didn't check the clock when halftime started, but usually it's between 17 and 20 minutes in college football. So that makes it almost 2 hours, 39 minutes. And I went back and checked, and by the time Trey Wallace caught that touchdown pass with 6 seconds left to when Nick Singleton scored that touchdown to open the third quarter, it was almost 3 hours apart. I think it was like 2 hours, 50 minutes, 2 hours, 45 minutes. That's a long time when you're considering that was 5 minutes of game time. But Penn State went in. They knew this was a possibility. James Franklin said that they made sure that they had plenty of food and that they wanted to be ready for this. I think this is something we were talking about during the week. Everyone saw the forecast. Everyone knew that something like this could happen. It was sort of a question of when. I think it sort of tried to become a question of if. Like going into it, we thought, oh, it's not going to happen until after the game. But then when we got to the forecast this morning, it was kind of like, okay, this is going to come at some point. And it did. And Penn State was ready. Talking to some of the players after the game, they said that they went in to the locker room. There's not much you can do. I think Jalen Reed said that he just sat down, listened to music. KJ Winston said that he just sat down in one spot, took his pads off, put his headphones on, and then just didn't move. I asked them how James Franklin was handling it, and they said that he was, on top of it, making sure that guys are staying focused, made sure they were staying engaged. Zane Durant said that, they were back, they were relaxing, they were chatting, but they all knew in the back of their heads when it was time, they needed to be back. I think he said that they needed to snap back, and that's exactly what they did. I think it showed with that drive coming out of halftime. So, it seems like, James Franklin talks about being prepared for every single situation. I think if you go back to 2017, this type of situation might not be on his radar. This type of situation might not be in the contingency plan book. But after that, it was, and they were ready for it. I thought it was really impressive because we were wondering in the press box, like it's been 2.5 hours since you were out on the field. The locker room is cramped. James Franklin said that it wasn't a critique of West Virginia. It's just how road locker rooms are. Beaver Stadiums is the same way. And so they, took benches from the sideline, put them in the tunnel. A bunch of guys were just right outside. And then they were good. They were watching. And when it was time, they were ready.
It was a sight to behold through you guys, because I know Grace Brennan was working her way wherever she could to get some great shots of players kind of sitting on those benches, whatever they're doing, trying to eat get some calories in them, trying to stay loose, limber. It's a long time off, and so they bookend this lengthy delay with a couple of really remarkable drives. The first, it comes in the final moments of the first half. It's a 13-6 game, and they're in a situation deep in their own territory, Daniel, where I expected them to just take a knee. I think that's probably, you're on the road. You've got a touchdown lead. You're getting the ball in the second half. It just kind of made sense. I think they did a quick run to start that possession. And then all of a sudden, Drew Allar and James said it himself. It was very chuck it deepish in the moment for him to send it deep. Omari Evans works his way back. James called that throw a duck, but it was a 50-yard play. It was a big gain to Omari Evans. I know that on the TV there was some discussion in the broadcast about it being offensive pass interference. There was no flag thrown. And so Evans gives you that big play downfield that we wondered if he might be able to produce, once or twice a game. And that sets the stage for Harrison Wallace to reach the end zone on the exact kind of throw and the exact kind of catch, Daniel, that I think when Nittany Lions fans were letting themselves imagine positively how the offense could look, it was that touchdown connection from Allar to Harrison Wallace. And they had a beautiful connection all afternoon. But that specific play, sending the team surging into halftime ahead 20-6, putting Harrison Wallace at 99 yards and 2 touchdowns before halftime, I thought that just signaled this is a different offensive attack. This is a different quarterback, perhaps, and this is a different aerial game than what we witnessed and what was so frustratingly lacking at times last year. We got to be careful because we saw 325 passing yards against West Virginia last year, but there was a different method to the approach, I felt, from Drew Allar and his play caller, Andy Kotelnicki. And we've got to give James Franklin credit to give that leash to go and say, yeah, attack downfield. Let's not take a knee and live to fight in the second half. Let's try to get points on the board now and then get more points on the board when we come out of halftime.
The end of the first half sequence kind of reminded me of the season opener at Purdue 2 years ago when Penn State got the ball late. They, I think, did a couple probing plays and then hit the big shot to Brenton Strange for the touchdown right before halftime. That reminded me a lot of this, where that first carry to Nick Singleton, I was kind of like, oh, like you got 32 seconds, like at least try. I think they had 1 timeout left, but then they turn around, go hurry up and hit Omari Evans on the deep shot. I just thought that was a very sort of savvy sequence. Shows, I think, the trust that they have in Drew Allar, trying to put their thumb on the scale a little bit. I thought that was just really key and something that worked out really well for them. And Omari Evans, we wrote about him this week as someone who could take off if he gets a couple big plays. James Franklin said that. We saw just that. I didn't get to see too many replays of it to see whether or not it would have been or could have been an OPI. All I'll say is that Mark Brennan's report card, I'm very interested to read his grade for the refs because it felt very unevenly officiated in both ways a little bit. Some ball don't lie moments there. But yeah, I think that sequence was really key because you saw maybe the idea and the mindset with this offense and what they can potentially do.
Yeah, there are 2 glaring instances of official replays in this matchup. Just speaking about the refs and the officiating that West Virginia benefited from on a replay that you figured, okay, replay will get this right. And they didn't. And one of them was West Virginia's only touchdown of the game, C.J. Donaldson's touchdown, which he was short. And then the other was a 4th down rush that they ruled first down from which, again, didn't even seem like it was that
I
close.
could tell it. I could tell he didn't get it. And
and could you imagine that didn't come up to James Franklin in the post-game press conference? Could you imagine if they had lost this game, what those plays, may have meant? But when you win by 22 and it feels fairly comfortable, you can kind of let those things fall by the wayside a little bit more than you would normally be willing to do. And we'll do that here on the podcast too, for conversation's sake. But Daniel, again, going back to the Drew Allar and Harrison Wallace connection, I believe the first 4 completions for Drew on the afternoon were all in the direction of Wallace. Those produced 99 yards. This was piggybacking off of what they did accomplish in the 4th quarter of the Peach Bowl. I think it was 4 catches, 67 yards and a touchdown in that final, couple of possessions for Penn State to close out the season. You thought, okay, is this a harbinger of things to come? And, it looked like it apparently today. What did you think about the fast start for Harrison Wallace? He finished with over 100 receiving yards. That was my bold prediction. And we if you listen to our last podcast, you know that we were all high on Harrison Wallace. But certainly the kind of breakout effort, Daniel, that a lot of people were hoping they might see at some point this year. He delivered it on day 1. His previous career high was 72 yards in a game. That was last year's opener against West Virginia. A couple touchdowns, wide receiver 1. I don't think there's any question about that. and plenty of confidence from his quarterback.
Are you doing the victory lap Monday when we have Mark on? Or
you got to get Mark on board for
Mark's gotta be
really, I think I'll maybe make sure I have all the stats that I need in front of me for that conversation.
Yeah, well, he's on pace for 60 catches now in the regular season. Yeah, but no, I mean this was the Harrison Wallace that I think we'd all heard about and not really seen. I think that we've talked about it where the career highlights are the 7 catches for 72 yards against West Virginia last year, the 48-yard catch against Michigan 2 years ago, the jump ball in the blue-white game. And then, like, if I'm being honest, I barely remember anything from the fourth quarter of that Peach Bowl. That game, it was just end of a long season. That just goes by the wayside.
I remember waiting to see a wide receiver catch a pass. That was the biggest story at that point.
Exactly. And so for Harrison Wallace, like, we've all been constructing the sort of image of this wide receiver from all these comments and these little glimpses that we're trying to extrapolate out. But I think that what we saw today was really the full package from him. We talked about it after that season opener against West Virginia last year, where he was the station guy. He was the Parker Washington, hit him and move the chains. Where today we saw that he had a couple nice catches for first downs. He had that one catch from Drew Allar on the out along the sideline where Allar was at the far hash. Really high level throw and a good catch. But then you saw the over the top deep ball for the 50-yard touchdown. And then you saw the contested catchability on that back shoulder throw. And so it was kind of the total package of Harrison Wallace, what we'd been hearing about. To finally get to see that, I think is really cool. And it changes your view of this offense, because it's what we talked about with the wide receivers, and this offense as a whole. Show us. We need to see it to buy in. And we got that today. You had 117, 2 touchdowns for Harrison Wallace. Then you had Omari Evans catching a 55-yard pass. The distribution wasn't quite there in terms of catches for the number of people that I thought there might be based on how many guys played and got out there. But I think taking it back to Harrison Wallace, if you have that number one and you have that guy that's making these big plays, that becomes a little bit less important. So I think Harrison Wallace coming out of today is maybe the guy that you change your view of the most, because you finally see it. You're really finally starting to get it.
I think what's really impressive about this is it only took 17 pass attempts from Drew Allar on Saturday for us to come away convinced that there was progression, that there was evolution for this passing attack, not just for Drew, but Omari Evans picking up where he left off last year. And for Harrison Wallace to live up to those expectations. And we didn't see Liam Clifford or Julian Fleming really, become an integral part of the offense in terms of production in that box score. But again, only 12 completions total on the day. One of those throws came from Bo Pribula to Tyler Warren. But what did you make of that? I mean, it was right off the bat, it became clear that Pribula was going to be involved, not just as a once in a while gadget, but felt like every possession he had some kind of role. What did you think was the pros of what you witnessed today, and what did you think were perhaps the cons of that usage?
The results with using Bo Pribula in that package, I wouldn't call them seamless, because there were a couple plays where Pribula left some yards on the field. I think there was one play where he went right, and if he'd gone left, wide open space. And I think that's one of the plays where I'm always like, I don't really know what he's supposed to be looking for. I don't really know all the keys. But on that one, it really felt like there was a legitimate option there. We saw a little bit of a speed option that with Nick Singleton that I thought was pretty cool. But the integration of it, though, did feel seamless. It felt planned. Like, it wasn't like last year whenever Pribula went out there, it sort of felt shoehorned in. And it was very much like, oh, here comes the gimmick package. Like, here it comes. Whereas today, it was maybe like that the first snap, the first couple. But then the more it happened and the more that they did it, it was sort of like, oh, this is part of the offense. This feels natural. This doesn't feel forced. And I think that's what you're really worried about when it comes to something like this. You don't want it to feel like you're trying to fit the square peg into the round hole. I do think that you maybe need to see a little bit better results. A couple times, though, it felt like Pribula was close to breaking big gains. And then I thought the throw to Tyler Warren, it was just a very slick play, because he'd been out there and it had just been run, 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 and then play action. Tyler Warren is wide open up the seam. Like that's kind of what you're setting up over the course of a game for that. Now you've got that on tape. So I think it just feels like something that it just feels more natural this year. It doesn't feel like it's being done begrudgingly. It doesn't feel like it's kind of lip service or it's like, oh, we talked about this at the beginning of the year, so like we have to do it now. It's kind of what you thought Andy Kotelnicki would do, given what he did out at Kansas.
It's not a decoy. It's not a gimmick based on what we saw today. And with Bo Prabula now, 11 total touchdowns in his career without a turnover. Almost had a turnover today, but upon further review, he did not fumble the football. He did pick up a first down as a runner. We know he's going to be a weapon with his feet at all times. 3 carries, 25 yards on the day. Speaking of picking up first downs, Drew Allar did that 3 times with his legs. He was 11 of 17 passing, 216 yards. 3 touchdowns. Again, he overcame a moment early that it challenged where his psyche was to get the ball snapped at him. He was just kind of shouting at the officials. But first of all, I saw Drew doing a lot of shouting generally today, and a lot of it was in the direction of West Virginia defenders. And what did I say? Confrontational leadership, not just among your crew, not just among the guys that you work with, but can you be the one who kind of steps up and gives it back to West Virginia in front of your squad? He had that today. I think he had a lot more fire visibly, more demonstratively than what we witnessed from him as a sophomore. So check that off the list. I didn't think that would be as clear and apparent as it was today. I thought maybe it would be subtle. It wasn't that subtle from Drew today. And then it kind of tying into what we heard all year long. He's more athletic. He's trimmed down. We've seen it. He's 10 pounds lighter. And guess what? It paid off. There were moments where last year, maybe he throws the ball out of bounds. Maybe he makes a safe throw that avoids an incompletion, but doesn't really do much for you in providing a spark. Now he's picking up 8, 12 yards, to moving the chains, giving you a chance to get a reset on your downs. And if he can do that, and James Franklin said it after this game, and I believe James said it this summer as well, if he can give Penn State new life on series 2-3 times with his legs, that's more than enough for what they need from him from that kind of a standpoint.
I know the comparison that Drew Allar gets a lot, mostly thanks to our scouting staff at 24/7 Sports, is Josh Allen. But to me, the thing that stood out was that it reminded me a lot of 2017 pre-injury Carson Wentz and a little bit of post-injury Carson Wentz. I covered Wentz for 3 seasons, so I saw a lot of him in person. It was one of those things where when it was bad, it was really bad. But back in 2017, 2018, you saw him escaping guys in the pocket. You saw him have that strength, that athleticism, that ability to be nimble, and be in the grasp, get out of it. The one play that I really compared it to was the 3rd down. I think it was a 3rd and 8, and Allar escaped like 3 guys in the backfield, got dragged down short, but just to be that elusive when you're that big, it just really reminded me of Wentz and the things that we saw when he was an MVP candidate. It just that really struck me. But I think you go back to that, just how demonstrative he was. Every time he's getting a first down on the ground, he jumps up and is doing the first down signal. Like, I don't think we saw that at all last year.
That's a Sean Clifford kind of move.
Yeah. And so I asked Jalen Reed about it after the game. Reed's been seeing him a lot. And he said that they see that all the time in practice, that they get mad at him because they can't touch him in practice. But they're seeing him make more explosive plays. And from there, I asked Reed, like, what's it like when your quarterback is carrying himself like that? And Reed said, quote, "It's great. That's championship team right there. When your quarterback got swag like that, it's crazy. I'm telling you, a lot of teams win championships like that. When your quarterback is the leader, that means everything." And I think that last point, like when the quarterback is the leader, that means everything. That's really what we've been waiting to see from Drew Allar. I think that's some of the feedback that we've gotten that like we need to see from Drew Allar this year. Zane Durant said that he's dressing better, and that was when Zane Durant kind of realized that, okay, there might be something a little bit different about him this year, the way that he's carrying himself, the confidence. So I thought it was really interesting. I mean, to see Allar go after the official like that after that play, like, I was really surprised. We have not seen that at all. And you wonder, because what we talked about after we talked to Drew in August, where he talked about bouncing back, not letting things snowball when things aren't going well, we were kind of like, this is the first quarter of the season. Like, are things going to go off the rails here? They didn't. He was composed. He's been ready for this. I was just very, very impressed with that. And to see him play with a little bit of an edge can add something a little bit different. And if the defensive guys are saying that and they're feeding off it, I think that's a really big positive.
The way Jalen Reed described Drew Allar to you and the way you just relayed it to us remind me a lot of the way that I'm sure Michigan teammates would have described J.J. McCarthy. And in my opinion, say what you want about, Connor Stallions gets a lot of credit, but I think J.J. McCarthy, for them getting to where they were versus where they were before him, I think a lot of it was his attitude and the way he carried himself, and we saw that. And so if Drew Allar can be that dude, and we're going to talk about Drew a lot more. We'll gather again on Monday with Mark Brennan, and obviously we're talking a lot of positives about number 15 right now. But elsewhere in the backfield, I mean, how about this? Nick Singleton. Talk about Omari Evans picking up where he left off last year. Singleton's another guy who seemingly flourished after Mike Yurcich was fired. Last year, the first 11 games of the season, he maxed out at 80 rushing yards in a game. We couldn't believe it. He went for, I think, over 110 yards Black Friday at Michigan State. He starts to get loose a little bit more in the Peach Bowl as well with some limited touches. But now back-to-back regular season games, going back to the end of last year and now here where he goes over 100 yards. And, this is what it takes, man. 13 carries, 114 yards. I don't know how pretty, 7, 8, 9 of those carries were. But much like we said during the Saquon Barkley days, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day if a couple or three of those carries are momentum swingers. So he had a 40-yard gain, I think, that put Penn State in prime position once. He had a 40-yard touchdown run, and he also had a 13-yard catch over the course of this one that helped them on a touchdown drive. What do you think about Singleton? And then to a lesser extent today, Kaytron Allen. He had a 20-yard touchdown reception on which he did most of the work. Kind of a quiet day for him, 10 carries, 20 yards on the ground. But these guys got it done in the box score, getting some points on the board. But more importantly, Nick Singleton was a field stretcher.
Yeah, I think to start with Kaytron Allen, it's kind of what we talked about. He's underrated as a receiver. And I think that, and it's also what Drew Allar talked about, where you get the ball to Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton in space, and it's automatically add 5 to 10 yards to what you got. I mean, Allen had Rodney Gallagher going for his legs at, I think, the 5-yard line, and Allen still got into the end zone. Him as a runner, I was surprised that he didn't have as much success because we've always talked about him as not having to worry about it. 5 yards a pop, almost no matter what. I'd be really curious what some of our posters who are a little bit more offensive line inclined on the message boards, I'd be really interested to get their feedback on the run game, what they saw there. But with Singleton, it was like what we talked about when we were doing our offensive and defensive MVPs in the podcast on Thursday. I picked Singleton because, to me, he is that home run hitter that, like you said, with Barkley, there's going to be some scuffling. It's going to be like almost there, not quite there sometimes. But when it hits, it hits. And so I think that he's the guy right now on the roster that you look at as the field flipper. You give him the ball, he can break a tackle, he can be gone. So we'll see exactly how this comes together and everything like that. There's one play I forget if it was Singleton's touchdown run or not, but there's a really nice play where they had Omari Evans in orbit motion out to the left side, and then the play went directly up the gut. That play just popped in my head. I forget exactly how it ended. It's 8:30 now. It's a long day.
A lot of fun motion today. I mean, that was something we expected. We did see Venga Ioane a couple times in motion backfield, all 6'4", 348 pounds of him at offensive line in pre-snap motion. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It was different. It was, again, something that we expected, but now we actually got to see it and digest it, and we did get to see Ioane do that.
And you saw how someone like Nick Singleton can benefit from that. So I came away really impressed. That I tweeted during the game that he has the juice this year, that we didn't necessarily see that last year for whatever reason, but to have this from the rip, I think that kind of like what we talked about with Allard, kind of what we talked about with Trey Wallace, that changes your view of how this offense can go a little bit right now.
I don't know how we're going to look into that 2023 vortex sometimes, because Omari Evans was in the Bermuda Triangle until Mike Yurcich was gone, and all of a sudden he started making plays downfield, and he keeps doing it. And Nick Singleton was like, didn't have as much juice as we thought he would. And all of a sudden the cup's all full again without Mike Yurcich calling those plays. So I don't know what happened last year, but the good thing is we get to focus on 2024 now. And if you're a Penn State fan, you really like the early returns for these guys. Tyler Warren was Tyler Warren, 3 targets. One of them was a big third down gain that helped set up a touchdown. One of them was a touchdown from Bo Pribula. He also had a key block on that 40-yard touchdown run for Nick Singleton. But naturally, we're going to leave not enough time to talk about the defense. We always do this after the game when Drew Allar does something special, the offense does something special. We got to cover a lot of ground on that. I promise we'll get more of a balanced perspective with Mark Brennan when we get to Monday. And by then, we'll have all our game snaps done up and everything. We can give a kind of a comprehensive look position by position. But defensively, it was hard to look away early, especially from those safeties and KJ Winston and Jalen Reed. I know you heard from Reed afterward early. He got a lot of love on the broadcast from the Fox commentators. Joel Klatt was kind of singing his praises. And I just, I thought he could be Mr. Do-It-All this year, and it was on full display. I believe you kind of posed the question. I don't know if you're talking about KJ or Jalen Reed, but is there a Jair Brown in this mix? Someone who's just going to seemingly be everywhere, all 3 phases of the defense seemingly. And today that was Jalen Reed doing his best Jair Brown impersonation. And I thought he was essentially a clone in the impact today.
Yeah, I thought Jalen Reed played a great game. He's someone that I was high on coming into this year, and something that we talked about being a little underrated with a lot of the offseason conversation around KJ Winston and what KJ Winston was doing and how he was being talked about. But I thought Jalen Reed came in and really announced himself. He said it after the game too. He was like, I was playing a brand new position. Like, I've never done that before in a game, or really done it since high school. And I thought he thrived. I thought that he was all over the place. He had that big tackle for loss to put West Virginia back. He told me he got the wind knocked out of him when he laid that big hit to break up a pass over the middle. I just thought that he was all over the place. And that's something that these past couple of years, especially last year, when there's not a Jaquan Brisker or Jair Brown back there, there was never that time where it was like, oh, these guys are all over the place. I thought KJ Winston and Jalen Reed were both good last year, but to have that from your safeties in game 1, for it to feel like they're everywhere. They had 16 combined tackles, and most of that was in the first half. It was interesting. And I posed that question to Jalen Reed post game, basically being like, you got off to such a quick start. You were everywhere. You were playing fast. And as I'm asking it, James Franklin is walking off the field, and he looks over, sees Jalen Reed, starts staring at him, and then walks around and into the area where we're talking to him. And Reed's in the middle of the answer, and James gets his attention, and he says, let me pull it up. You were flashing all over the field early in that game. You looked like you were running at a different speed than everybody else on the field at the beginning. And I think that really summed up what we saw from Jalen Reed. And it was funny because I had literally just asked Jalen Reed that. And so James walks away, and Reed looks at me and goes, yeah, that. But I just thought it was what you want to see early from someone who's supposed to be a key player on this team and a key role at that Lions spot. And is also regarded as a leader back there.
Yeah. And I think you said 16 combined tackles. I'm looking at the stat sheet. I don't know how if the official one's accurate here, but 21 combined tackles between Winston and Reed. 12 for KJ Winston, including 7 solo stops, and he had a forced fumble. And then Reed was credited with 9 tackles. One of them for loss, as you referenced, and he had 2 pass breakups. I believe he had one there on maybe West Virginia's first possession where he kind of went up top, broke up a pass. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was the tone setter for what we saw from the secondary all day, whether it was Jalen Kimber, A.J. Harris, Elliott Washington later plucked an interception, the sophomore, kind of reminding people, hey, I know these transfers are cool for Penn State, but there's some homegrown talent brewing here like Elliott Washington. And if you want to talk about areas that lived up to the hype today, that's the one I would circle. This defensive backfield. I thought overall the defense was more buttoned up than I anticipated in their debut under Tom Allen, especially against a kind of a wiry quarterback like this, who was, a big time threat last year, 700 plus rushing yards, 13 scores on the ground. Garrett Green didn't have any game that would make you think he was a special talent today. And that was because Penn State came in with a concerted effort, a plan, and they have the athleticism. We've said it before. Tom Allen has hung his hat on being a defensive coach before, but he's never come close to the talent level that he has at his disposal right now in terms of depth and the top end of this defense. But I think it starts with that secondary like we thought it might.
Yeah, I think that you work right now from the back front when talking about this Penn State defense. I know that on Monday we'll probably talk a lot more about Abdul Carter, especially getting the chance to go back and watch it. But seeing the number of guys they were rotating through in the back, I think it's worth mentioning that the starting corners were Kimber and Harris, the two transfers. I thought that was a little bit interesting, but you saw a lot of Cam Miller. You saw a lot of Aldavian Collins. You saw Elliott Washington. You saw Zion Tracy at the Lion. You saw Cam Miller at the Lion. I think you just saw the amount of mixing and matching that they're able to do. And you saw them really rolling through guys. We've talked a lot about depth. And it seemed like they were really doing everything they could to keep guys fresh throughout the game. So, I think that this defense, who knows statistically if it'll be as good as it was last year under Manny Diaz, but I think it still has to be the chance to be pretty good. And one defensive shout out to give, Smith Vilbert, first regular season game since 2021, gets credited with his first sack since the 2021 Outback Bowl. I believe that's the fourth sack of his career, and gets the forced fumble. So I think that was kind of a cool thing to see, someone that we hadn't seen in a while. Alonzo Ford hadn't played since 2022. He's out there mixing it up. I think those are two cooler, like under the radar storylines coming out of today.
Ford showed that he can hold up his end of the bargain at the point of attack. I think we saw exactly why they were so excited about him in preseason. And you're right about Vilbert. And it wasn't quite exactly as he dreamt it, but denied Dennis Sutton was on the fumble recovery there after Smith Vilbert forced it. You may have heard us on our podcast last week. We caught up with denied Dennis Sutton as preseason camp came to an end. He told us he had two vivid dreams leading up to this matchup on the field at West Virginia, and he forced a fumble in both of them. He saw Smith Vilbert force a fumble. He scooped it up in reality, but kind of a really strong and encouraging start to the Tom Allen era on defense. I thought this, no one's going to come out of this game nationally or locally and say, wow, that unit really took a step back without Manny Diaz. I want to finish with just a little bit of a question mark at kicker now, because Sanders Sahadak gets a chance to go out. It's not a pressure kick. The game's out of hand, but it's clearly like a confidence booster. I think it was a 46-yard try on the field there in the fourth quarter. He had made his extra points. Remember, Sahadak missed both of his field goal attempts in the first half last year against West Virginia. He was the initial starting kicker, and then he was benched for the rest of the year for that role in favor of Alex Felkins, who moved on as a grad transfer. So it started out well for Sahadak with the extra point. You got to imagine it was not kind of working through some things psychologically, getting back on the field against the same team. But to miss that kick, and he missed wide right, it wasn't a great kick. I think this probably leaves the competition open to interpretation for at least a few more weeks. And the schedule probably allows you to maybe see multiple guys in a game if you want to get into that.
Definitely something to follow up with James Franklin about next week as we move forward. I think that the game's out of hand. It's easy to hand wave that stuff sometimes, but in a program like Penn State's where they track every little thing and competition is the name of the game, that's another data point for them. We talked about the competition being between Sanders Sahadak, Chase Meyer, the Tulsa transfer, and Ryan Barker, the redshirt freshman, who we'd heard a lot of good things about. Sahadak and Meyer were the two kickers who were active today. Barker wasn't on the travel roster. So I think that's a little bit of a hint as to the direction that the competition has gone. So I think we'll have to watch on Saturday against Bowling Green to see if another number 91, Chase Meyer this time, gets a look at Sanders Sahadak's expense.
And just speaking of the travel roster availability stuff, Caden Saunders was available. He did play. It turned out it made his impact as a punt returner. Didn't cost you. And then ultimately, we did see Khalil Dinkins sideline as we thought we would at tight end. It meant work for Andrew Rapplier. It meant work for the freshman Luke Reynolds at tight end behind Tyler Warren. But no surprise inactives in terms of people that we thought would play. We'll monitor the team's health coming out of that. But there's also weren't a lot of moments where we saw guys lingering on the field and down for obvious injuries. So seemingly you come out of this way in decent shape from a health standpoint. Daniel, before we say goodnight, let you and Mark hit the road. Anything before you put your head to the pillow and kind of move on to Sunday that you think is worth sharing with us in the podcast while it's fresh from the 12 hours you just spent in Morgantown?
Oh man, my brain is pretty fried right now. I texted Mark 5 minutes ago that we were winding down so that he could pack up. So I think we should probably get to the road. But I think that the one thing that stands out to me is Penn State coming out and just kind of asserting itself. I do think that there's a lot that when you look back at this that you're going to want to look a little bit deeper at. The offense felt a little feast or famine at certain points, with those big plays and then with some 3 and outs. The defense let West Virginia move the ball a little bit before standing tall. But I just think that overall, to win this game on the road against a team that people have high expectations for with a weird wrinkle in it, like this weather delay, I think you can only feel good coming out of it. And you have the chance to really, really build that confidence these next 2 weeks before going into Big Ten play, or next 3 weeks. So I think Penn State's in great shape.
You were looking for explosive plays from the offense. You got it. You were looking to see how they would handle the Power 5 conference's top rushing attack from 2023. They give up 85 rushing yards. It's a 34-12 victory for Penn State. We'll talk more about it on Monday with our next podcast. In the meantime, check out content from myself, Daniel, and Mark. Grace Brennan on the road. There'll be a photo gallery from her as well. Daniel, appreciate the hard work today and extended work today. And I'll see you back here in Happy Valley soon.
Thanks, Tyler.
This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast. Thanks for tuning in as always. We'll talk to you real soon. I'm Tyler Donahue. He's Daniel Gallen, and we'll talk to you at lions247.com.